Hi everyone. I lucked out and I got an assignment from school to do a staff training on the prompting hierarchy. And that's exactly what I wanted to talk about in our Friday behavior tip email. But I was not able to finish it on time. So here it is a little bit late, but hopefully it's useful and you can add it to your tools of things to use with your students. All right, so I know that this background isn't the cutest. It's kind of ugly. I chose scaffolding though for a reason because it's the way that I remember the prompt hierarchy. When I was going through elementary education, we talked a lot about scaffolding. And honestly, scaffolding and the prompt hierarchy are pretty much the same thing. So if you know the term scaffolding, you kind of already know what prompt hierarchy is. So the reason why I like the picture is because scaffolding creates a kind of soft structure that is built before the building to kind of help make the building stable. And so it's kind of similar to how we prompt our students, and we have scaffolding in to help them and prompt them. But then you start taking scaffolding away slowly so that eventually they can just stand on their own, such as a building after you take the scaffolding. So that is always the goal with prompt hierarchy, is that your student or client can just acquire a skill and use it independently. So here is the prompt hierarchy. It starts at the bottom with the most intrusive and moves its way up to the least intrusive. And we're going to talk about how you can use this prompt hierarchy going from most to least prompting or least to most prompting. So what is prompting? It's a technique used to help individuals learn new skills by providing assistance and cues to learners. There are two ways to use that. You can either start from most to least, or you can go from least to most, as discussed. And so I'll go a little bit more into that. So why should we even use it? And you know what? Let me grab this pointer. I think that'll be better. So prompting has decades of research supporting its effectiveness in teaching learners new skills. Research dates back all the way to the 1980s, and so we've got a lot of research and data that show it's pretty effective. In Libby and colleagues' article in 2008, they found that most to least prompting had better results if they put a delay in there. And all that means is rather than right away helping a student or a client, you wait about 3 to 4 seconds, or depending on the learner, how long you wait. But you'll wait for a little bit before you start prompting. And that way they have an opportunity to respond independently if they know it. If they don't, then you can go in and help and make sure they get it right the first time. The other thing that they found is that least to most prompting worked really well for a lot of students, but it did allow for more errors, and we'll talk about why that's a problem. So some tips for best practices is just use most to least prompting. It's usually better. The acquisition rates are a little bit faster than least to most, but it does have a greater likelihood for creating prompt dependency. So prompt dependency is when a learner stops trying on their own and they just wait for you to be prompted, or wait to be prompted. And you've probably experienced this with students before. I just talked to a teacher not too long ago that said her student she thinks she knows how to identify a number, so she'd point to the number 2 and say, "What's this?" And she would just kind of sit there and shrug and say, "I don't know," and wait until someone told her, "Say 2." And the experience with her is that she sometimes would say that on her own, but a lot of times with an adult, she would just wait to be told. So that would be a good example of prompt dependency, or in other words, learned helplessness. So to avoid that, we use delays, like I talked about. You just wait for a little bit, and you can build on those delays. In this example of that student that I just talked about, it would probably be a good idea to start implementing a 3-second delay before giving any kind of verbal prompt, and then eventually a 4-second delay, a 5-second delay, until it's, you know, pretty long time before they ever give her a prompt. And then we also need to plan for prompt fading, which essentially just means always moving up the hierarchy to the least restrictive type of prompt. Let's stick over here in the tips. So if your learner acquires skills quickly, you might as well just use least to most. There's no need to start with the most intrusive type of prompting if they've got a history of acquiring skills quite quickly. Ooh, there's a tongue twister for you. And then Netzel and Woolery in 2009, they created a step-by-step guideline for implementing the prompt hierarchy. So I have provided that in the references. It's a great resource if you really want to get good at this. Glendenning, Adams, and Sternberg in 1983 found that prompts are best when you use both verbal and physical prompts, and you keep using the verbal prompt while fading physical prompts. So you might say the prompt as well as help them physically do it, and then slowly fade out that physical prompt. So let's talk about each prompt so that we know what they look like, and then we'll talk a little bit more about implementing them. So full physical, this is its shortened version, oftentimes used when doing data collection. So a full physical prompt is when you just do hand-over-hand assistance. So as you can see in this picture, the teacher is helping the learner do everything with this sandwich. They're grabbing their hands, and as you can see, it's the most intrusive. So with that sandwich, they're using hand over hand to help them actually physically assemble the sandwich. And I am going to be using these same two examples since they're quite different in the way you prompt. But by sticking with these two examples, you can see how these prompts are faded all the way through. So when teaching a learner to ask for a break, you can physically hold their hand near their wrist or above their hand and help them pick up a break card. This is really the only other way that you could physically prompt to ask for a break is put your hands over their hands and help them sign for break. Otherwise, you can't really fully physically prompt this skill. So partial physical prompting. When you do this, you actually just fade the amount of touch. So as you can see in this picture, this teacher is just barely touching his arm. She is not holding his hand and helping him write. She's just guiding his arm, and it's a little bit of assistance. So with our sandwich example, you might touch their elbow to prompt them for the next item, or just kind of help them reach for that next item. And the further away you get from the hand, the more faded the physical prompt. So you can start hand over hand as full physical. When you move to the wrist or the elbow or the shoulder or back, that would be partial physical, and you're fading out until you're not touching at all. For that physical, partial physical prompt in the break example, just touch their elbow or their shoulder to cue them to pick up that break card. So with modeling, you show them yourself, you do it, or you say it exactly how it needs to be done, and then you can say it's your turn, or you try. So with our sandwich example, you could say, watch me make the sandwich, or just model a step in making a sandwich, or you could do the whole thing, that depends on the learner. And then you say, your turn. So they model after what you just did. With the break example, model picking up the break card, handing it to the teacher or whoever has the authority to give a break, and say, oh, Miss Megan, can I have a break? Hand it to that person. They'll say, oh, absolutely, thanks for asking. You can have a break over here for 5 minutes. I walk over to the little break area. I engage in a sensory activity or whatever I need. And then I look to the learner and say, your turn, or you try. And now they can practice doing the exact same thing as you. For a gestural prompt, that is just pointing or looking in the right direction or towards the correct response. So in our sandwich example, you can point to the next item and just kind of, point to the bread and then point to the peanut butter or whatever sandwich they're making. Or if you've got a task analysis and it's got pictures, you could point to the next picture, though that's also kind of a visual prompt. With the asking for a break, you can point to the break card. So when you see they're getting frustrated and overwhelmed, pull out the break card and just point to it and kind of show them, hey, you can do this. You can say the words, ask for a break, while gesturing. That would be, the verbal plus the physical kind of. Next is, well, I could have put full verbal prompting, but I just kind of put these two together. Excuse me. So verbal prompting is when you tell the learner exactly what to say or exactly what to do. When you're doing a partial verbal prompt, you're not finishing the sentence or you're not finishing the word. So in our sandwich example, you can say, now pick up the bread, put them on the plate. The way you fade to partial verbal is you can say, pick this up, now pick up the, and you can further fade that by saying, now pick up, and just stop for a minute. See if they fill in the blank or if they go for the correct item. With learning how to ask for a break, you can say, hey, say, I need a break. And then to fade that to partial verbal, you could say, I need, and wait for them to fill in the blank. And you can continue fading that out. So you could say, hey, Megan, say, you kind of gesture with your head, there's more to be said. But you really only start fading a verbal prompt when they have successfully said break. It depends on your learner if you're going to use a sentence or just a word, or if you're going to continue with just a sign or a card. That'll depend on your learner. But if they can say the whole sentence, you're just going to fade out each word as they start building independent responding. So once I say, hey, say, I need a break, and they say, I need a break, and they've had success with that, that's when you can start fading out words. You can even fade the word itself, so you could say something like, I need a br, if they need a little bit slower fading. All right, so we're to visual, we're almost to the top. A visual prompt is when you use a picture or a symbol to provide that assistance or that prompt. So in our sandwich making example, you can hold up a picture of the next item or place the next item within the line of their sight. And so that's it's very not intrusive. It's the least intrusive that you can do, is just kind of nudge. If bread's the next thing they need or the knife's the next thing they need, you can nudge it into their line of sight and kind of just stay quiet. With that break, asking for a break, you can hold up a picture like this one and just hold it up and not say anything and kind of go, ask for a break. If you need to go back to that verbal prompt, you can do both, but it's less prompting just by holding up a cue and not saying anything. Yep, let's go to the next one. So independent, that means they did not get prompting from you. So here is where we need to talk about natural cues, because it's a little bit easy to get a natural cue confused with a verbal prompt. So if the natural cue in the sandwich making scenario for that learner is, hey, Megan, make your sandwich. If that is the natural cue, it's not a prompt. And if they can make their sandwich by themselves without any further prompting, I would count that as an independent trial. If you want to teach this learner that the natural cue is hunger, we can't really teach that because that's an internal event. That's not something we can really learn from them other than them learning that for themselves. But we can, kind of do observations of their behavior. So if they're starting to search for food or whatnot, you can tell them, hey, make your sandwich. So it depends on which you want to count as the natural cue. Personally, in this, I would count make your sandwich as the natural cue, and then if they do it by themselves, it's independent. With asking for a break, the learner simply asks for a break without any kind of prompting. They notice, oh, you know what, I'm frustrated, or I'm tired or bored, and they go to the teacher and say, I need a break, and obtain it. So here's an example of most to least prompting with washing our hands. And I will kind of skip through it, but just give you a good idea of what's going on. So here's the full physical prompt. Hand over hand, all the way through every behavior. So this is considered a behavior chain because there's a lot of short, small, connected to constitute all that is hand washing. So as you can see here, she's no longer putting her hand fully on the learner's hands. She's doing as little touching as she needs. She goes through the whole hand washing process. So with most to least prompting, as you can see, usually it's one whole trial is using one prompt method. So they did the whole hand washing using full physical. Then they did a whole hand washing using partial. Right here, they're doing modeling. So it usually goes per trial is one type of prompting, whereas in least to most, we'll see something a little bit different. So now the learner is modeling what the teacher did. I'll turn it up a little bit. So this is verbal prompting. She's telling her what to do. And there's partial verbal or independent, depending on what we want the natural cue to be. So here's least to most with washing hands. So that pointing was gesture. So as you can see with least to most, this is one trial of washing your hands, and she is moving down the prompting hierarchy in just one trial. She is trying all the prompting methods until she gets correct responding from the learner here. And so it's a little bit different. And as you can see, a learner could potentially practice errors rather than responding accurately every single time. So that's where, if you want to reduce the errors being practiced, you'll want to use most to least prompting. But if the learner, has a history of learning skills quickly, this is perfectly fine. See, verbal's not working for this learner. Model, she's now doing it. So in that moment, she had to go through independent, visual, gestural, verbal, and then she modeled what to do, and then she got correct responding from the learner. All right, so this is a quote that I found from McKay and colleagues in 2014. They did an article. It says, "It is widely accepted that prompts should be faded so that the response is occasioned by natural cues." So the translation of that is, if we want a learner to acquire a skill so that they can do it without us there, we have got to fade the prompt. We cannot stay stagnant in prompting a student physically for months. I would even argue for a week would be too much, but it depends on the learner. I've had learners that I was able to move from most to least in a 25-minute period, where if I was teaching them to identify the letter A, I could teach them with physical and then start moving up the prompt hierarchy, and within 25 minutes, they could do it independently. I've also worked with other students that it took about a year to get to the independent stage. I had a client that could not figure out the difference between under and over, and I faded prompts, and then I had to kind of start over and go back and forth, and so it really does depend on the learner. So the takeaway for today: prompts help learners acquire skills faster by helping them practice with accuracy and minimizing errors. The more you can, for example, if you're teaching a student, what's 4 plus 4? And they keep responding 9. And you say, ooh, try again. What's 4 plus 4? 9. What's 4 plus 4? 9. They are now creating a neural pathway for 9 when they hear what's 4 plus 4. So it's really important to use prompts so that we don't allow our learners to create incorrect neural pathways. So it's better to say, what's 4 plus 4? 8. That would be a verbal prompt. Or you could say, what's 4 plus 4? And gesture to the number line. And that way they can practice getting the answer right, and they start building that neural pathway instead. So most to least prompting minimizes practicing errors, as we just said, but it can also cause learned helplessness and prompt dependency. The way that we can combat that is with generalization. So you do that with using delays, waiting a period of time before you prompt, and fading the prompts so that you're moving up the hierarchy as much as you can. Even with least to most, you eventually move down the hierarchy in one trial, but in the next trial, what we're hoping for is that you don't have to move as far down the hierarchy. So if they needed a model to get correct response, then after they've responded correctly with the model so much, we're hoping that they move up. So next time with a verbal prompt, and next time with just a visual. So we're always moving towards independent responding. The best way of learning about anything is by doing. That was by Richard Branson. We all really, truly, I think, respond better to practicing and doing what we're being taught rather than just being told. So start using prompt hierarchy. If you want to know more on how to do that, here are my references. Ask me, email me. If you'd like a specific training for any of your students, I'd be happy to come in and do that for you. Let me get out of this. If I know how, it's right here. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.